He had no rank, wore no uniform, and was not on the access list. But when his calculations proved to be true, the entire fleet froze. No one dared to record what happened next in their reports. You ever walk into a room knowing you're already guilty of something, even when you ain't done a damn thing wrong? That was me. March 1942, standing in the draft room of the San Diego Naval Yard. Smelled like burnt steel, boiled beans, and the sweat of 100 men who'd long since stopped asking questions. The whole place buzzed like a hive running on habit and caffeine. Welders shouting, cranes creaking, paper pushers scribbling notes they'd forget tomorrow. The war machine was purring, loud, dumb, and self-satisfied. And me? I just wanted to save some lives. I wasn't an officer, wasn't military, wasn't white either. Which you better believe mattered, even when they swore it didn't. Harold Vincent, mechanical engineer, civilian, colored. 38 years old with 2 kids, 1 ulcer, and a brain full of ship designs nobody wanted to hear about. They didn't know what to do with a man like me. I didn't drink the Kool-Aid, didn't play the fool, and sure as hell didn't keep my mouth shut when I saw something that stank. And what I saw stank from bow to stern. The Navy was pouring money into floating castles, battleships with enough steel to crush their own shadows, guns the size of houses, armor so thick it took 2 days to weld a scratch. All because some admiral's textbook from 1910 said size meant power. But this ain't chess. This is war. Real war. And those big, proud ships, sitting ducks. Too slow, too loud, too visible. You could see 'em coming 3 miles out and still have time to light a cigarette. Me? I had a better idea. Smaller ships. Faster, lower profile. Built for torpedoes, not cannon showboating. Hit hard, move fast, disappear. Like ghosts with teeth. You wouldn't win with pride. You'd win with precision. But try explaining that to men who measured courage by how much iron they could bolt onto a hull. I drew the whole thing up in a week. Late nights, cold coffee, and a lot of cursing under my breath. My hands ached from the drafting table. But when I looked at that blueprint, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Real, stubborn, brass-knuckle hope. So I did the one thing you're not supposed to do when you're a colored engineer in a white man's navy. I submitted it. Brooks saw the envelope before I dropped it in the outbox. "Tell me that ain't what I think it is," he said, jaw full of chewing gum and doubt. "It's a design," I told him, "for a ship that might actually help us win this war without stacking more bodies in the Pacific." He chuckled the way men do when they think you just set yourself on fire. "Vincent," he said, "you don't toss pebbles at giants. You either salute 'em or get the hell out of their way." Well, maybe it's time someone tripped one. He shook his head. "You're gonna get crushed, brother. This place don't want ideas. It wants obedience." Maybe he was right. But I mailed it anyway. Stamped, signed, and slid across some mahogany desk where it gets skimmed by a bored junior officer with a stack of donuts and no skin in the game. Then I waited. 9 days. The answer came on a folded piece of navy letterhead, hand-delivered by a kid who looked too young to shave. 1 sentence, that's all. Proposal deemed operationally unsuitable. Civilian input outside standard development channels is discouraged. That was Navy speak for shut up and stay in your lane. I read it once, then again. I didn't even get mad at first. I just sat there on a bench outside the office, letting the sun burn holes in my uniform and that sentence in my gut. Operationally unsuitable. Like I'd suggested sinking the fleet myself. That's when he showed up. Admiral Madsen. Man walked like his medals weighed more than his morals. He glanced at the paper in my hand, then at my face. Didn't say a word, just raised one brow like I'd spilled gravy on his dress whites. "You're Harold Vincent," he finally muttered. Not asked. Stated. "Yes, sir." He nodded slow, like he was digesting something bitter. "You think the Navy needs fixing?" "No, sir," I said, lying through my teeth. "I think it needs saving." That made him pause, and then, no smile, no approval. He walked off, heels echoing like gunshots on concrete. The next day, my toolbox was gone from the drafting room. Transferred, reassigned. Project redundancy, they called it. Funny how that happens after you rock the boat. They moved me to hull inspections. 6-hour shifts in the dry heat, scraping barnacles and checking rivets with a flashlight that barely worked. It was punishment, but dressed up in protocol, and everyone knew it. Brooks wouldn't look me in the eye. Whitey Johnson, yeah, that's what he called himself, gave me a wink that felt more like a slap. "Should have stuck to monkey work," he muttered when I passed. Not loud, but loud enough. I didn't answer. I'd heard worse. Hell, I'd lived worse. But you want to know the truth? That blueprint, it wasn't gone. It was burned into my head, clear as day. And out there, beyond all the egos and polished brass, was a war that didn't give a damn about Navy traditions. And that war was coming fast. What happened next changed everything. You don't want to miss how deep this rabbit hole goes. They thought they could shut me up by moving my boots a few yards down the dock. Funny thing is, when you've spent your life being moved out of the way, schools, factories, voting booths, lunch counters, you learn how to see it for what it is. Not a punishment. A pattern. They reassigned me to hull inspections, which is just a polite Navy way of saying, "We don't want you thinking anymore. No more drawings, no more calculations, no more desk. Just me. A dented clipboard, a dented flashlight, and a whole lot of silence." And the silence, that was the part they wanted most. They didn't just sideline my hands. They wanted to bury my mind. Now, let me be clear. I didn't need validation. I wasn't chasing medals or trying to get my name etched in some granite wall 50 years down the line. All I wanted, all I ever wanted, was to help keep some of our boys from dying inside steel coffins too big to turn around. But the Navy had its own kind of religion, and the altar was built out of battleships. And priests in starched uniforms. They didn't like heretics. My new station was a rusted scaffold under the belly of an unfinished destroyer. Hot, noisy, and full of men who worked with their backs, not their mouths. I got a 3-minute rundown from a petty officer who looked like he'd rather be anywhere but talking to me. You see a crack, you mark it. You see a bolt loose, you mark it. You see anything not how it's supposed to be. I mark it, I said. He smirked like I'd just recited the alphabet. Good. Don't touch nothing. Don't ask nothing. Don't start nothing. I nodded, and just like that, I was part of the shipyard's invisible class. First week, I kept my head down, took notes, marked what needed marking. Some guys talked to me, most didn't. But I noticed things, like how they skipped rivet checks near the prop mounts, or how some of the younger welders were cutting too fast, leaving micro-fractures no one double-checked. It wasn't sabotage, it was speed. The clock was God around here, and every delay got a man yelled at by someone who'd never picked up a torch. So one day, I did what they said not to do. I spoke. "Lieutenant, I think you ought to take another look at Frame 37 Day. There's a line running deeper than standard." Lieutenant Keller looked up from his clipboard like I'd interrupted his wedding vows. "Who are you?" "Harold Vincent, hull inspections." He glanced at my badge like it had an expiration date. "And you're trained to assess structural tolerances?" I didn't blink. "I'm trained to recognize when steel's gonna snap." He leaned back. "Frame 37A is cleared. 3 signatures on that report." "I'm aware, but 3 signatures don't stop stress under fire." That hung in the air for a second too long. Then he closed the file and walked off. Did he check it? I don't know. Did I make enemies? Definitely. Next morning, my locker was jammed shut. Someone had poured grease in the lock and taped a note over the vent. "Keep checking. See what it gets you." Classic move. Passive. Silent. Not quite violent. But the message was loud enough. That night I went home with my uniform in a paper bag and oil in my palms. And I asked myself, the way you do, when your chest gets tight and your pride gets tired, was I wrong to care? But something happened the next day. A kid named Lopez, maybe 20, with burnt fingers and scared eyes, caught me behind the rig. He didn't say much, just dropped a folded sketch onto my bench and walked off. I opened it. Cracks, frame 39, engine casing. 2 areas nobody signed off on. His notes were crude, rushed, but his eyes had told me everything. He didn't trust the system, but he trusted me. I stared at that drawing for 10 minutes, then I got up. It took me 2 hours to gather everything. Proof, measurements, chain of inspections, safety violations, sketches, photos, the whole thing. I stapled it together and walked it into section control. The man at the desk, some clerk with his feet on the cabinet and a face like wet cardboard, didn't even look up. "You can leave it in the bin. I'd like to speak to your superior. Commander isn't in. I'll wait." "You can't wait here." I put the file on the desk, real slow. "I'll wait outside." He didn't answer, so I waited. 3 hours later, Commander Neely came in, flanked by 2 aides and already scowling. He looked like a man allergic to information. I introduced myself, told him why I was there. He listened, barely. Then he sighed. "You're not an engineer of record." "I'm a man who saw a problem. Chain of command exists for a reason, Mr. Vincent. Otherwise, we'd be flooded with every opinion from every dock monkey with a pencil." His words weren't sharp. They were dull, blunt, like someone trying to knock you down without looking like he pushed. "Dismissed," he added, and turned away before I could answer. They didn't say anything for 2 days. Then the tool inventory officer flagged my badge, said I hadn't logged a ratchet wrench on my shift. Accusation of misplacement. Formal warning. The wrench was on my bench, where it had always been. Didn't matter. 3 warnings meant reassignment. Again. This time to night shift. Cargo platform. No inspections. Just crates. Numbers. Silence. I told my wife the truth that night. We sat in the kitchen, kids asleep upstairs, the smell of boiled rice still lingering. "I tried," I said. "I really tried." She didn't say much, just took my hand and looked at me the way only a woman who's watched you get broken before can look. "Then try again," she whispered. "You see, they thought I wanted praise. They thought I wanted credit. They didn't understand. I just didn't want another coffin floating back to some mother who'd been told he died in service. When, really, he died from silence. And if that meant I had to start over, again and again, so be it. because what I saw in that dockyard was bigger than me, and it wasn't over, not by a long shot. This is the turning point. Everything you've waited for comes to a head right after this. Stay with it, because what happens next will hit harder than anyone expects. Night shift on the cargo platform wasn't hell. Hell at least had fire. This place just had silence. Steel crates lined up like tombstones, forklifts growling in the dark like half-asleep dogs. No chatter, no questions, just numbers, boxes, and a rhythm you weren't supposed to break. That was the point, of course. They didn't want me working. They wanted me disappearing. No light, no voice, no trace. And for a minute, I almost gave it to 'em. That first week, I moved boxes like my brain was on mute. Didn't talk, didn't ask, didn't push. Just kept my head down and my hands moving like the Navy wanted. Invisible labor, clean paperwork, no fuss. Then came the second week. That crate. It was sitting by itself near the back ramp, marked for Urgent Transfer Pacific. Thick, gray, twice the size of standard issue, and heavy enough that 3 men had to move it with double clamps. Nothing unusual at first. Wars full of big secrets packed in small labels. But I caught something strange. Wrong codes. The weight didn't match the manifest. And it was tagged as non-armament. But I'd seen enough war machines by now to know when a box was lying to me, so I did the thing they hated most. I looked closer. No bolt locks, just welded seams, uneven. Amateur work. And the angle of the cut. Looked like someone sealed it in a hurry. I grabbed Lopez, the same kid who slipped me that sketch 2 weeks ago. "You seen this crate before?" He hesitated, then nodded. "They said not to touch it, just move it." "Who's they?" He didn't answer, just backed off like someone was watching. And maybe they were. I stood there, hand resting on cold steel, and that gut feeling, the one that keeps you alive when rules won't, started pounding like a drumline. So I took a risk. Found an old friend down in maintenance, Corporal Roy Jefferson. Quiet, sharp, and tired of nonsense. We served together back in civilian shipyards before the war, back when they still called our designs unrealistic, and our credentials non-traditional. "Roy, I need 15 minutes of your badge." He raised one brow. "What kind of 15? The kind that gets me fired, or promoted, depending on who's watching." He didn't smile, just handed it over. "You've got 10. I scanned the lock file on the manifest terminal. Cross-checked the crate's ID with past routes. That's when the red flag lit up. Diversion order, not logged through command, meaning someone rerouted this shipment off the books. Meaning it wasn't just an error, it was a cover, and I had just uncovered it. I printed what I could, stuffed it under my shirt, and walked back out like nothing happened. But something had changed, because I wasn't just a sidelined engineer now. I was a threat. And the system doesn't take kindly to threats. The fallout came faster than I expected. By the next morning, I was called in by a base officer I'd never seen before. Lieutenant Commander Reed, tall, clean, with the kind of voice that made you feel like you were being measured for a grave. "Mr. Vincent," he said, without a smile, "we've received a report of unauthorized access to restricted cargo documentation." I didn't blink. "Is that so? Would you care to explain your involvement?" "No, sir, but I'd care to know why a crate meant for the Pacific doesn't show up on command logs." His jaw didn't move. His eyes did. Just a flicker. "I think you're misunderstanding your role here. I think you're misunderstanding mine." He leaned in just enough to let me smell the steel in his tone. "You are a civilian contractor. You do not investigate. You do not audit. You do not question." He let that word hang, like it was some kind of curse. And that was the thing right there. They weren't mad because I was wrong. They were mad because I wasn't supposed to ask. By the time I left the office, my ID was flagged, escorted off the dock. Administrative leave, they called it. No charges, no explanation, just a quiet removal, same way you throw out a tool that makes too much noise. I got home early that day. My youngest asked if I was sick. My wife already knew by the way I walked through the door. She didn't ask what happened. She just put on a pot of coffee, sat down and waited for me to speak. But I didn't, because I was too tired of hearing myself be right in rooms that refused to listen. That night, I sat with the papers. All of them. Designs, notes, photos, crate data. A stack that meant nothing to the men in power, but everything to the boys heading out into a war they didn't start. And somewhere around 2 a.m., I knew. They weren't gonna listen. Not unless I made them. So I pulled out the original blueprint. The one I submitted before they reassigned me. The one they tossed out like junk mail. I laid it next to the manifest report, side by side. What I saw made me sit back in my chair and exhale. Because sometimes you don't need permission to do what's right. You just need a plan, and a reason that won't let you sleep. This chapter was the clash. But what's coming next? That's where things finally erupt. You've come this far. Now see what happens when a man's got nothing left to lose. There's a funny thing that happens when people try to bury a man too early. If he's the kind they're scared of, he doesn't stay down. They tried to shelf me, lock me out, strip my badge and call it policy. But see, I didn't come up through doors that opened easy. I learned young that when you're not invited, you don't wait, you build your place. And that's exactly what I did. After they sent me home, I kept quiet on the surface, didn't file complaints, didn't stir the pot, but I wasn't done. I still had my notes, my sketches, and, most important, I still had people. Not many, just enough. Lopez, Corporal Roy, a yard dispatcher named Meredith who'd seen a few things herself, and 2 welders out of Section B who owed me favors from back in the day when somebody had to vouch for them after a cracked keel nearly cost them their jobs. You can call it loyalty. I call it memory. The system forgets. But we don't. I didn't need access to the main dock to get moving. Meredith slipped me copies of cargo routing logs, no questions asked. Roy kept me in the loop about which test crafts were being pushed through without proper checks. And Lopez? That boy was everywhere. Eyes open, mouth shut. Smart enough to never look like he was looking. Between us we built a picture, and what we saw? They weren't just ignoring my design, they were copying it. That crate I flagged? Inside were early modular hull plates. My configuration, my specs. Rebranded, recoded, stripped of authorship. They took the bones of my ship and grafted them into some secret project, and never even bothered to get it right. Because without the full picture, without the calculations only I had worked through, that ship wasn't a weapon, it was a liability, and every man they put aboard it was being set up for failure. I didn't have clearance, but I had the truth, and truth, real, hard, uncomfortable truth, as a way of leaking out. So I started writing. It wasn't a manifesto, just a report. 4 pages, clean, sharp, outlined the original concept, the unauthorized repurposing, the missing components, and the likely mechanical failure points. Backed it up with source numbers, engineering diagrams, cross-referenced every page. No speeches, no drama, just facts, the kind that make people shift in their chairs when they read them. I mailed 3 copies, one to the Bureau of Ships in D.C., one to a newspaper editor I knew from before the war, a man who'd covered labor strikes and knew how to spot a cover-up, and one, hand-delivered, to someone I never thought I'd speak to again. Admiral Madsen. Yes, that Madsen. The man who told me back in Chapter 1 that our fleet wouldn't be undone by enemy fire, but by our own pride. I tracked him down through a contact at the officers' club, caught him on his way to a briefing, briefcase in one hand, steam in the other. He saw me and his face froze like I'd pulled a fire alarm at his daughter's wedding. "Vincent," he said, "Admiral, you're not supposed to be on base, and yet here I am." He didn't like that, but he took the envelope, didn't open it, just held it like it might stain his fingers. "This better not be nonsense." "It's worse," I said. "It's truth." 3 days passed. No call, no visit, no patrol at my door, just silence. Until the 4th day, when I got a letter. Typed, no signature, no header. "You are advised to cease further distribution of proprietary materials. Continued action will be viewed as interference with national security interests." That's what they sent. Not a rebuttal, not a correction, a warning. They'd read it. They knew. But instead of fixing the damn problem, they circled the wagons. Tried to spook me with vague language and uppercase threats. But what they didn't understand, what they never seemed to understand, is that once a man's been pushed out far enough, threats don't work the same. I wasn't trying to save my job. I was trying to save lives. So I doubled down, wrote 5 more copies, sent them to engineers I'd worked with before the war. Smart men, quiet men, respected enough to not be ignored. 2 responded within days. One said he'd been flagged for review just for asking about fast-track ship testing in the Pacific. The other said the design matched a project his team was forced off without explanation, and that he'd been ordered to destroy his notes. That told me everything I needed. They weren't just stealing ideas. They were burying people. But then something shifted. A friend at the docks, not even someone close, just a crane operator named Ellis, flagged me down one night. He handed me a folded paper with no words, just numbers, schedules, a launch date, a ship ID, a test run site, and one phrase scribbled in pencil: "She's going out unready." That was all I needed. Because now it wasn't about blueprints. It wasn't about pride. It was about a vessel, born out of my design, corrupted by silence, heading into open waters with 30 young sailors on board, and a failure rate I could map in my sleep. I wasn't going to watch that happen. Not again. You've seen the pressure, the pushback, the lies. But what happens next? That's when the real fire starts. You'll want to be here for Chapter 5, because what comes is not quiet. It's not clean, and it's not supposed to happen. They scheduled the test for a Tuesday. Quietly. No press. No ceremony. Just a line in a classified file and 30 young sailors with smiles they hadn't earned yet. They didn't know what kind of ship they were stepping onto. They just knew it was next gen. Fast. Lightweight. Innovative. What they didn't know was that it was also unfinished. Built off a blueprint they didn't understand. Rushed. Unbalanced. And missing the structural corrections that I, and only I, had ever written down in full. The kind of corrections you don't learn until it's too late. I could have walked away. Plenty of folks told me to. Quietly, politely, and not so politely. Let it go, Vincent. You've done enough. They won't listen. But if I'd learned anything in my life, it was this. Just because something isn't easy to fix doesn't mean you walk off and let it break. So I showed up. Not at the dock. That would have gotten me cuffed before I stepped past the fence. I showed up at the control tower, 3 miles down the coast, overlooking the bay where they'd be running trials. I knew who was scheduled to be there. I had the list. Commanders, evaluators, a few engineers brought in from outside, folks with crisp uniforms and clean fingernails. I didn't wear a badge. I wore a name, mine, and I carried a folder, heavy with reports, calculations, copies, photographs, stress tests. The stuff I had saved after they tried to make it all disappear. I walked in like I belonged there, not because I did, but because no one expected me to. The room buzzed with voices, controlled, clipped, too formal to mean anything. A projector clicked behind them, showing a silhouette of the ship out on the water. She looked smooth from here, clean, sleek, beautiful if you didn't know what was wrong with her. I stepped forward. No one noticed me at first. Then one officer glanced up, another turned, and then I heard it, that brittle, bureaucratic voice I knew all too well. "Excuse me, this area is restricted." I didn't stop walking. "Harold Vincent," I said. "I designed that ship." The room froze. No welcome, no handshake, just tension. A man in a dark jacket stepped forward. Admiral Lorne, one of the signatures on the rejection letter I got months ago. "You were removed from this project." I was removed from a room, not the truth. He stepped close. "You're interfering with a classified test. This is a direct violation." I opened the folder and dropped it on the console in front of him. "This ship isn't safe. Not because of the design, but because of what you left out of it." He didn't touch the papers. "I'm going to ask you to leave. I'm not leaving until someone reads that." A long silence. Then someone from the side, an older officer I didn't recognize, picked up the top page. He scanned it, eyes narrowing, lips tightening. "This isn't in our data set," he said. "Exactly." He looked up. "Where did you get this?" "I built it before you ever rebranded it." The next few minutes were a blur of clipped whispers and tight expressions. Some left the room, some got louder, some tried to ignore it altogether. But the file made its rounds, and I watched it shift the air, one person at a time. Not everyone cared, but a few did. Enough. Out on the water, the ship began its first maneuver. She looked good. Then came the second run. She banked hard, and that's when the vibration started. On screen, it looked like nothing, just a shake. A slight rattle in the forward hull as she pushed past torque threshold. But I'd written the numbers. I'd seen the math. That wasn't a rattle. It was a warning. I turned to Admiral Lorne. "You run that ship one more time without stopping to recalibrate. You're going to lose structural integrity on the port side." He clenched his jaw. "You're not authorized to. I'm not guessing, I'm telling you." He looked at the screen, back at me. And then, for the first time since I walked into that room, he paused, not because he believed me, but because the ship had started shaking again. Harder. They called off the third maneuver, brought the ship back in. No alarms, no panic. Just a silent, subtle, very fast decision from someone behind the glass. The sailors never knew why. The officers said it was routine, but I knew better. And so did Lorne. He didn't thank me, didn't shake my hand, didn't speak another word. But he didn't arrest me either. He just watched as I picked up my folder and walked out. That night, I went home, Didn't talk much. Just sat with my wife, held her hand. She asked me if I was okay. I said I was, because I was. Not safe, not satisfied. But okay, because 30 sailors got off that boat in one piece. Because truth, however slow, however quiet, had finally spoken louder than the silence around it. This chapter was the storm, not in the sky, but in the room. And when the noise settles, the dust tells you who stood and who folded. The ship never sank. And for some folks, that's where the story ends. But for me, that's where it started. Because saving those 30 men wasn't the finish line. It was just the crack in the wall. And once you see daylight through a system built to keep people like you out, you don't turn back. You widen it. Word started traveling in whispers. Nobody made announcements. No memos, no medals. But I noticed the way the engineers started checking with each other twice before signing off on test reports. The way officers looked twice at the specs they used to wave through. And the way folks who used to walk past me, eyes forward, mouths shut, now nodded when they saw me on base. Respect? Maybe. But more likely, recognition that I was still here, that they hadn't pushed me out, that someone who wasn't supposed to be in the room had spoken and been right. I was never officially reinstated. That's not how these things go. But one morning I got a call from Section 3, Hull Review Team. Mr. Vincent, we'd like your input on some calculations. They didn't apologize, didn't admit anything, just opened the door a crack and waited to see if I'd step through it. I said yes. Not because I forgot how they treated me, but because I remembered who they ignored. That week, I sat in on design review panels. Men who once looked at me like I was invisible now leaned forward when I spoke. Not because they trusted me yet, but because they couldn't afford not to. And in war, that's often the only shift you'll get. Not heart, just necessity. But I could work with that. A month later, I was walking past the dry dock when I saw it. A new vessel, under construction, sleek, low profile, curved hull, modular armor, twin torpedo bays with adaptive trim tabs. My blueprint. Yes, but finally done right. And no, my name wasn't on the build order, but the weld pattern on the lower deck. That was mine. Only I used that particular offset to account for torsion under repeated fire. It was subtle, but it was mine, and I stood there for a long time just watching the crane lower another segment into place. Back at home, I didn't say much about it. Didn't need to. My wife saw it in the way I took my shoes off, slower, steadier. The way I stood at the sink after dinner just breathing. She asked, finally, "You done fighting?" I smiled. "No, but I ain't yelling anymore. Now I'm building." And that became the rhythm. Work, quiet, corrections, progress, not overnight, not clean but steady. One test craft at a time, one checklist revision, one miscalculation caught before it turned into a tragedy. It wasn't about proving myself anymore. It was about making sure the right things were done, even if no one ever gave me credit. Especially then. Then one day, a young black recruit approached me near the edge of the scaffolding. New face, still learning how to wear the uniform without apologizing for it. He looked nervous. "Sir," he said, "you're Mr. Vincent, right?" I nodded. "I read about you in a report," he said. "The one they don't circulate anymore. About the test that almost—" He trailed off. "You were the one who stopped it." I looked at him. "No," I said. "The ship stopped. I just made noise until somebody heard it." He smiled, real slow, then asked, can I show you something I've been working on?" We sat on a crate for 20 minutes going over his sketches. Raw ideas, but sharp. You could see the thinking. He had something. And more than that, he had the nerve to want better. That's what made me proud. Not that I was right, but that he believed he could be too. I never got a commendation. I never got a corner office. But I got to walk into work knowing that silence didn't win. And when the war finally ended, and the big speeches got made, I stayed where I was. In the shadows of cranes, in the hum of dockside welding, in the blueprints drawn by hands that never stopped asking questions. Because that's where change really happens. Not on podiums, but in steel, in wire, in grit, and in the people who refuse to shut up when lives are on the line. Not every war ends with a parade. Some end with a man walking home a little straighter, knowing he didn't fold. That's enough. That's everything.